Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Women in Computer Science and Harvard Design Collective joint event intro to UI UX. My name is Emily Hong. I'm a senior at the college studying computer science and education, and I'm part of HDC.
I'm Vicky Shu. I'm a comp director of Wix, and I am a sophomore in career studying AMCS.
Hi, I'm Jacinta. I'm also a comp director for Wix. I am a sophomore studying computer science.
And Wendy will be leading our workshop later. She'll introduce herself then. All right. So first of all, what the heck is UI UX design? Well, UI stands for user interface and UX stands for user experience. And these are two fields that are used very closely, they're closely knit to basically build out how a product feels and looks. Where UI, the interface is primarily the visual part of the product, so how it's laid out, what the different screens might look like of, say, like a mobile application or a desktop application, website, etc. And user experience is almost more holistic, but more about how the product feels in almost any way that a user or someone might interact with some product. So these are terms that are used in the industry. I've been told that recently a lot of these things are all lumped together under the term product design. So whenever you see that, especially in the context of the tech industry, it's very much just how do we design online experiences in every aspect of the product. There's just this cool quote that you can read on your own to maybe give you an idea of what the difference between UI and UX is. Okay, so how does UI UX fit into like the whole company, how things are built out, etc. Especially since this is a Wix event, I think it's useful to put it in context of where engineers and developers come into it. So oftentimes product designers work super closely with maybe product managers and like more on the business side of things to help scope out what exactly they want their product to be, what the product niche is, what problem they're solving, etc. And so what that ends up looking like is customer analysis, user research, coming up with wireframes, which we'll explain in a little bit, prototyping, and just planning out how this product will be developed. So kind of after the product design team comes up with their whole project, they hand that off to engineers, software engineers usually, to using some kind of mock-up or whatever to give exact specifications of like, this is how I want my product to work. This is how I want it to be interacted with from a user level. And then it's then up to the engineers to decide how to optimally and efficiently implement their design. So that's kind of where the handoff comes. And then after the developers finish developing and do all their testing, that's when a product is able to launch. And I know this slide looks very linear, but in reality, it's a very circular process. You go over and over and over, but I think the kind of the main point is product designers tackle things before any of the development happens. All right, from there, what exactly are the product designers doing when they're thinking about this stuff? So I want to share actually this slideshow with you all so you guys can click along. But these are just a couple links to some random case studies I found online. And I think this is a really good way just to get a feeling for what product designers are thinking about, is just reading through case studies. And case studies are kind of like the main unit of how people share their work in the product design industry. So this is just one on eBay's like card design system where each of these is a card. And the designer was in charge of deciding, first of all, to use these and also how they should be used, giving, again, specifications to engineers on how these things should be implemented, etc. So as you can see, there are like lots of different examples. And this is more on the UI side because it's more visually focused. And on the UX side, there are also equally the same amounts of case studies. This UX study is starting on a very kind of user, not directly visual problem and trying to solve this in a visual way. So helping homeowners understand their home value. And they've done a bunch of analysis here about like, oh, this visual is confusing. These are some of our pain points, etc. Here's some brainstorming, as you can see. Again, not really trying to focus on the details here, but just overall, what might a case study look like and what are the types of questions that UI and UX designers are asking. So those are just a few examples. Feel free to go in and look at some of the other ones or Google some on your own, but I find this to be a really cool way to get a feel for what exactly product designers might be doing and might be thinking about. On a more high level, maybe after you skim through some product design case studies, I think there are like a few themes as to what product designers are usually focused on. So it's not just, does my app look really cool and chic? Though that is, I think, definitely a fun part of it, but it's actually really important to any company's product and just how a product is received overall. So for example, good product design is key to having good usability and accessibility for as many people as possible. I feel like a very common example is like color blindness, or how do you design a product not only for people with good eyesight, maybe those who are blind or deaf, and that's all, any kind of interface, not necessarily visual, all fits under the umbrella of product design. In addition, good product design is make or break for clear communication. I'm sure you guys have come across apps and websites where you stare at it for 30 seconds and you just don't know what it's trying to say. Good product design is key to kind of eliminating those struggles, and also helping organizations build a consistent message and brand identity that they want to share with the public. Graph on the right is just some different, I guess, fields of study you could consider that all fit under product design, things that I think product designers all have to think about. So what exactly do product designers do on a day-to-day basis? This is a Quora post, clearly, that I thought was pretty good. So I think the main point of this post, and I think the best point of it, is that product design is super collaborative, super collaborative. I would go even to say more collaborative than software engineering, in that because you're so closely tied to the business side and you're kind of communicating what you want the product to be and end up looking like, you have to talk to everyone. So marketers, product managers, fellow designers, engineers, users, you're in charge of making sure that everyone's needs are being heard here and all of their needs are being expressed through your product. But more specifically, I think this guy breaks it down into like a few stages of product design. So one, if you're planning a new project, doing a lot of playing and concepting with other designers or product managers, and conducting a lot of user studies or interviews. I think something surprising to me about product design that I didn't know before was that there's just so much research that goes into it. And a lot of user feedback is informative of what designs end up being. If you're in production mode, so actually making the prototype in wireframes, you're probably designing specs or specification documents, presenting them, getting critiques from other designers and maybe other players, and doing that over and over until you get something that you're satisfied with or you hit a deadline. And also maybe when it's in production mode, so the product is actually being made, although you're probably mostly done with your creative work for the product, you're collaborating with engineers to make sure that they understand clearly what you want to be implemented. Okay, so that is all to be said. Day to day, you're probably just in a ton of meetings. Maybe you spend some time, block out 4 hours of your day to make a prototype or a wireframe, and then you're just in more meetings. So super collaborative. And on this slide is just like another link to hear from more designers' day-to-day work.
Okay, so what do UI UX / product designers do in a more specific sense? The UX methodology in particular has like a couple of tiers of things. There's the double diamond model, which is like, it's like a model for the process of like beginning to end, how it works. It's pretty much what it says. It's like the shape of two diamonds together. If you're on the slides right now, then you can just click through and look at it. But pretty much like each stage, the first stage is discover, which is like you learn about the problem. Second is define, so you figure out what specific you should focus on. And then once you've defined the problem, like once you've narrowed it down, that's where like the two diamonds meet. And then you start developing potential solutions. You find the solutions that work, and then finally you deliver it. So that's the process that's basically described by the double diamond model. Other stuff that is involved in the methodology includes user research. So obviously you conduct surveys, you have interviews to make sure your product is actually hitting in the right spots. And there's like a lot of wireframing involved and prototyping. So they're both UI UX designers use the apps that we'll talk about a little later in this presentation that involve prototyping. So like it's a lot of proof of concept making. So your clients or your manager can see what's your vision is for your product. Next slide. Okay, yeah. So hard skills involves Adobe Suite. Photoshop, Illustrator, and Sketch are pretty common. I think like Illustrator is one of the more preferred ones just because you can use vector art. Whereas Photoshop, I think most things are rasterized. For Figma, that's what we'll be going over in the workshop in a couple of minutes. Also InVision, should be familiar with wireframing, and you should also be familiar, or you should also know how to conduct user research, which is usually like just testing based on certain features. And obviously you need like soft skills such as communication, collaboration, empathy, pitching your work. This is like skills that are common to any field, which is obviously pretty important in UI UX because you have so many meetings every day with different people collaborating with a bunch of different entities. Next slide. Okay, roles that incorporate tech X design. So there's like the obvious ones, UX designer, UI designer. At smaller firms, these might be synonymous. So you might be doing both. There's graphic designer, interaction/motion designer. There's UX researcher, which is a little different from designer because you're more looking at like how different features might work rather than actually implementing them. UI/front-end developers. So not only do you design, you also implement your designs. And that usually involves knowledge of some coding languages and frameworks such as React, JavaScript, lots of JavaScript in this field, and also product designer. So some possible contexts you can for these roles include freelance. Obviously, you can also work with a design agency, and you can also work within a bigger company, such as a startup or a larger company. And obviously, your schedule and your daily work and your salary all differ based on where you are and what you're interested in doing. There's also another link on Design Census 2019, which you can kind of look at for more details. I'm going to relink the presentation because I know some people have joined, so I'm going to send it again in the chat. Okay, yeah, so for the people who have just joined, we've included a lot of links in the slides, so you can also click through as we go. Next slide. Okay, so what is the industry like? So pretty much if you make any digital product, you need UI UX, and it is quite in demand just because the digital product space is expanding so much and so fast. But because of that, there's also a lot more like designers coming in, and it is becoming an increasingly competitive field. But yeah, and as a designer, you do have, I guess, a proportionally larger impact in terms of what you can do and how you can influence just the aesthetics of the product. So there's like there are fewer designers in demand, I'd say, than engineers, like proportionally, but that doesn't mean like you can't find a job or anything. There are a couple of different places, again, that you can work. So jobs at tech companies are typically stable and consistent. Obviously, still depends on the tech company you're at, but especially for the larger ones, or if you're at like a Fortune 500 company or something like that, then you're usually continuously working on the same product team, or like, I mean, it also depends on what you want for your career. So if you want to switch product teams, you probably can also do that. But jobs at design consultancies involve like new projects a lot. You're surrounded by mostly designers, you're interacting with clients, and your hours depend on the field that you're in and your company, and like, yeah, the company that you're with. So I think like gaming fields versus big tech might have a large discrepancy in hours. If you're working in like UX for gaming, there might be a crunch time before any game launch or any new feature ships or things like that. Next slide. So no industry discussion is complete with the discussion of salary. We just wanted to like add a disclaimer to this. Obviously, your career choice shouldn't hinge mostly on money. It should be also that what you're interested in. But that being said, there is a sort of misconception that if you go into a creative field versus a technical one, then you'll typically be taking a pay cut. And that is just not true if you go into UI UX. It's actually one of the highest paid fields in the design industry. As you can see, salary averages. I think this is for new grads, question mark, or maybe like 1 to 2 years out of college. But yeah, senior designers can average over 6 figures. And obviously it's adjusted for cost of, so yeah, like if you're living in a higher cost of living place, you'll obviously probably make more. If you live in a lower cost of living place, you'll probably make less, but it'll be adjusted. And there's a video there from the previous slide that is someone talking to Khan Academy. And yeah, this is levels.fyi, which is just basically a salary sharing site where you can compare. Next slide. So how do I get an internship or how do I break into the industry? First thing is portfolio. That is probably the most important part of your application if you ask any recruiter, because it's kind of hard to quantify what you are like as a designer without looking at proof of your work. This is like, you cannot just tell what kind of designer you are by just looking at a resume. So 2 to 3 solid projects in a portfolio is probably fine. Usually each of these have like the methodology, the thinking, and the visual design explained very clearly. You also should practice interviewing for obvious reasons, just like in terms of how you present yourself and how you come off, not just mainly for soft skills actually. And personal website is really helpful, primarily for displaying portfolio or past work. I think most job applications will ask for a link to a personal website or a reel when you apply for these positions. And the aesthetics do matter because it is a more creative position. So they are looking at how you present yourself, even with the website design. And in your portfolio on your website, or elsewhere, you should be highlighting your decision-making skills, design philosophy. So not only should you be including like pictures of the created product or prototype, you should also be going through every step of the process along the way, starting from the sketches and then the thinking and then the changes you made and then all the consideration and the research you've done. That's all of these are factors that play into the field. So that is also what employers are interested in. And yeah, so luck and good portfolio, good interview equals job offer. The timeline for recruiting. So in the fall, it's rolling for many tech companies. I think UI UX and project design typically recruits like slightly later than like traditional technical SWE roles, but not much for the bigger tech companies. Late winter or early spring is what most other companies do. So it's also pretty good to get a design position at newspapers or magazines. Those could also be very, very helpful. And IDEO, which is a very cool design agency, opens in February or March. And later spring, there's also a lot of startups that recruit, which happens on a case-by-case basis. And yeah, so this is just an example of someone's design portfolio / website. As you can see, it's a very cleanly designed website. And then she detailed, it's like, I guess, indicative of the way she approaches her own design. I've said design so many times in the past 10 minutes, but anyways, so yeah, you can probably Google her name and click through, but pretty much for each one of her works, she goes through like from beginning to end how it works, and also goes into a lot of details over what is going on in the prototype. And again, it's very clean. And this is another like product designer. So similar comments, it's a very clean website. There's not much, there's a section for about, there's a section for work where she'll explain from beginning to end, again, what she does, or some of her past projects. And there's also resume and a contact. So very uncluttered. Okay,
So some ways to get involved in product design at Harvard. Some organizations, the number one is obviously Harvard Design Collective. So if you want to join this organization, you can get in touch with Emily and she'll help you in that area. Also Harvard Data Match, which is who they're actually having their first like general meeting tonight. So it's definitely not too late to join. Because they have specific comps for product design as well. So it's a really good way to get more experience. Similarly, the Crimson and the Advocate both have design sections, and HSA Design Bootcamp also allows you to get more experience in the field, but pretty much any organization that has a website will need some sort of product design team. So these are just a couple of them, but there are many, many more. You just have to, look and ask around. So these are just some courses that Harvard offers that have to do with UI, UX, or product design. So CS 171, which is offered in the fall, focuses more on visualization, whereas CS 179, which is taken after 171 in the spring, focuses more on HCI or human computer interaction. CS 279R is similar to 179, except that it focuses more on research topics in HCI. Sci 22 is a product design course offered at SEAS. And then something that a lot of people, I think, don't realize is that psychology courses are also extremely relevant to this field, because when you're making a product for a customer, it's really good to be able to kind of get into their head and like understand psychologically what they're looking for, and also for the user that you're making the product to be able to be accessible to them as well. MetaLab at the Berkman Klein Center, which is a Harvard research center, also has great opportunities there, as well as MIT during the IAP, which is their independent activities period, which is offered, or it's held in January. It's a 4-week long period where they're able to kind of do their own thing, do their own independent research and study. And a lot of the courses have to do with front end design. And then lastly, Adobe Creative Jam. It's you get a free Adobe subscription by entering, and it's a really good way to build up your portfolio. So to get some inspiration, again, if you're looking at the slides right now, you can click on these websites and like view them on your own time. Dribbble has individual design pieces that are product oriented and are very standard for product designers. Similarly, so does Behance. Again, it's project oriented. It's standard more so for visual/graphic design. And you can find general art at their website. Cofolios has some internship resources and more inspiration. Blush.design has a collection of free illustrations for UI UX creations. And you can also follow some TikToks, product design and at design a lily. And there are probably like a lot more as well. And to find design internships and resources, you can go over to interns.design for information on that. Now, Wendy will be leading a workshop into Intro to Figma.
Hello, everyone. I'm Wendy. I'm a rising senior in Elliott, and I'm currently taking a gap year. I'm going to skip the full intro because we're a little bit tight on time, so I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully, everyone here already has Figma downloaded and they're logged into it. Okay, great. Really quickly, it's like a little bit hard for me to see everyone, and like if everyone is like following along or confused, obviously, because we're on Zoom and I'm sharing my screen. If anyone has any questions, literally just unmute your mic and just like stop me, because that's probably the only way I'm gonna notice. And yeah, this will be, again, like I said, a little bit fast paced because Figma is just, there's so much to do in Figma, and I have to cover a lot, or I'm gonna try to cover as much of the basics as possible. Okay, so Figma is one of now like several prototyping tools. And we're gonna first talk about, so I have the outline right here. And actually if Vicky or Emily wants to send the doc that I messaged you guys earlier into the chat, people can also follow along there. It might be a little bit confusing though. So we're gonna talk really quickly about hierarchy of organization first. So right now, if you guys, just log into Figma, you guys will probably see something like this. So this is your dashboard. And, once you make files, they'll populate here. And this is like, you just have everything in one place. So now you can either make a new file or click on an existing file. You guys can probably just make new files. So you just click this plus button and it should open up a tab for you. And actually, okay, so I'm gonna go over 1, 2, and 3, and you guys can just like look at my screen share. Afterwards, from 4 on outwards, from 4, 5, and 6, we'll probably go like, I'll talk a little bit, let you guys try it out, and then we'll come back and I'll do a little bit more. So just gonna do 1, 2, and 3 first. So like I said, you have your dashboard, and then within your dashboard, you have this file. And now within your file, you have several other layers of organization. So you can see here on your left, you have pages. So it'll probably look like this at first. You can click the drop down and it'll give you page 1, and you can add a page, name it something else. We can just stay on page 1 for now. And then within your page, you have what you call frames. And so frames you can see listed underneath here, but they'll also populate in your canvas, which is the central space. So you can see, I have a notes frame and then a MacBook Pro frame, and I'll explain these a little bit more in depth later, but that's your basic hierarchy. So you have your file, pages within a file, and then frames within those pages. And then your workspace, which is what we're looking at right now, you have sort of separated into 4 different parts. So I briefly mentioned this bar right here, this column. This is sort of like your organization column. So it'll tell you, what frames you have, what you have within those frames, etc. You can move things around in here, rename things. Then you have this toolbar on top, and this basically has all your primary tools for creating. So frames, shapes, pen tool, text tool, hand tool to move things around, and then a chat tool, which I'll go over later, as well as your menu. And this obviously has your classic menu functions. And then to your right, you have what you call the inspector column. And your inspector column basically tells you more about whatever you are selected on. So if I select off of something, you see that there's, essentially nothing here except for the background of my canvas. If I select something like an element, now I can tell its dimensions, what properties it has, et cetera, et cetera. So that's your workspace. And then this, of course, is your canvas, like I mentioned earlier. And then really quickly, finally, we have your Figma modes to work in. And your Figma modes are all accessed within here. So you can see design, prototype, and inspect. Design is similar to what you might imagine it to be. It's where you're actually creating and modifying the visuals of the interface. Prototype is where you actually sort of connect everything together. So all your different frames and elements together using these little blue arrow things. And that just makes everything work as if it's like an actual app. So you can like click from one screen to another, etc. And then finally, you have your inspect mode. Your inspect mode, you can just throw to the side for now. You don't really have to worry about that. But that obviously gives you just a list of details. And the really nice thing about this is that if you are into development, like front-end development, it actually gives you the CSS for everything. So if you're selected on, for example, the text here, you can see now it'll give you the, the font type, font weight, etc. And it actually also has it for iOS and Android. So yeah, this is more for a development side. And then finally, I do also really quickly want to point out almost like an extra mode. It's not really a mode, but if you click this play button right here, this allows you to preview. And I've already done that. So it'll open up a new tab for you. And this will actually show you what you have on your screen as if like you're actually using it. And you can like click if you have prototype stuff. Obviously, so this right now is on my MacBook Pro screen, which you can tell because it has the play button next to it. So it'll start on this screen. I have nothing here, so all you can look at is a white screen. I do want to point out that right here at the top right, you have options. And right now I'm on scale down to fit, which is my favorite mode. But if like your screen size perfectly matches your frame size, you can also do display at full size and all these different ones. But we can just do scale down to fit for now. Oops, That's not what I meant to do. Okay, awesome. Okay, so that's the basic intro. And let's see how I'm doing on time. Okay, pretty good on time. Okay, we can slow down a little bit now. So now let's start actually creating things. So we are going to create a very, very basic web page. And so the first step that we'll have to do is you'll have to be in design. And then let's say you have nothing on your canvas. So like I said, you make everything within frames. So first you'll want to make a frame. And the really nice thing is that Figma actually gives you all these templates. So you don't have to like think about, oh, like what are the pixel dimensions of every size? And it like has a ton. So for right now, we can just use MacBook Pro. That's pretty industry standard. And so if you click on that, it'll literally just populate your screen with a MacBook Pro. I'm gonna delete this because I already made one, but you guys can all go ahead and do that. And afterwards, you can rename it your home page. So if you double click on the name, it'll let you rename it, or you can rename it in the layers column. So I'm gonna give everyone like 10 seconds to do that. Okay. So now everyone should have this homepage frame. But I do want to mention that you are also free to make frames of your own size. So you can see right here that I have, a notes frame. And oftentimes you will want to, for example, collect a bit of information, notes to yourself, or like test out elements on a separate frame of just your own size. So for that, you can literally just click and drag, just hold down and drag, and then you can make a frame of any size. So you guys can also try doing that really quickly. All right. Okay, so hopefully everyone has their frame, and you can think of your frame as basically like a piece of paper now on your desktop, like on your desk. And now you can just like create things within these frames. So just to test out, what it feels like to create something really quickly, let's just make a rectangle to go on our home page. And so you can see I've selected the rectangle tool, but you could do, any one of these shapes. And you just, drag it to however large you want it to be. And we'll also try modifying a few of the properties so you guys can get a feel for that. So let's make it this red color, give it a stroke of like 3, and then you can add effects, and let's just add the standard drop shadow. So yeah, so everyone can go ahead and try making a rectangle or any other shape you want to make really quickly. And again, stop me if I'm going too quickly. All right, are we all good? Okay, I'm gonna move on. So you can see that using these and including the pen tool, the pen tool is similar to the pen tool in Illustrator if you've used it before, where you can just like freehand lines. You can actually create most of the things that you do see on home pages. And in general on Figma, like if you want to create a much more advanced shape, like an illustration, Figma isn't exactly an illustration tool, so you'll probably want to create that in some other app and then actually import it in as a PNG. But I will show you how to make sort of slightly more complex geometric shapes. And you guys don't have to do something this complex, but I'll just give you an example of how this might be used. So let's say like on a lot of apps or home pages, you might have like a home button, right? And especially on apps in the tab bar, a home button often actually like looks like the silhouette of a house. And that, it would kind of be a pain in the ass to use the pen tool to make, but you can actually put together different geometric shapes and create like a very basic house. So let's just say now I have these two shapes and that looks approximately right. So let's say like this is my house outline, but now they're two separate shapes and I can group them, but that's also kind of annoying. So what you can actually do in Figma is if you select two shapes, and you can select any number of shapes by either dragging over everything or by shift clicking. So you hold shift and you click on both. You'll see this little pop-up in the toolbar, which looks like two rectangles overlapping. And this, if you drop down, you actually have a number of different options. So you can like union, subtract, etc. And so this we'd want a union because we want to combine them. And then a house might also have, like a very basic door cutout. So we would draw another rectangle in there. again, select both shapes, and then you drop down. Oops, sorry, that's not what I wanted. Drop down, and then this time you actually want to subtract the door frame from the actual house. And so if you subtract, now you've got this little house icon. And so this is a good tool for just making slightly more complex shapes if you don't want to like go into Illustrator and draw and then import it in. And I'll give everyone just like 30 seconds or so to try like, you know, making a union or subtraction of two different shapes. Once again, you don't have to make a house because that's a little bit extra.
Wendy, while we're waiting, we just got a question from
Yes.
Clarissa, who's wondering, how do you color a union?
Yeah, so you can actually color a union the same way that you like color anything else. So once it's one shape, you'll see that there's this fill. So the fill property, or sorry, I should actually explain this really quickly. So every shape has a fill and a stroke. And the stroke refers to the outline and the fill refers to the color on the inside. So if you see here, right now the fill is gray, and you can actually just change it to any color you'd like. So let's make it green. And then if you want to get rid of the fill, you can just, you know, minus. And if you want to give it a stroke, you just like click plus, or you just click stroke, and then this will give it a stroke. Hopefully that explained the question, or that answered the question. All right. Hopefully everyone is done. Now I'm going to make it gray again. Okay. So moving on from that, hopefully everyone's had the time to play around with union and subtract and etc. And now I actually just want everyone to sort of preview their page really quickly. And so if you look at my screen right now, you can see that you can actually like, it looks like what I've created. We do have a slight issue with this though. So you can preview it, and then let's just say, you know, this works for one screen, right? But you can see you can't move anything around. And obviously most screens you can actually scroll down on, because like very few screens are just like literally the size of your desktop screen. And so let's just say this rectangle was like significantly longer, right? So now it extends out of our homepage frame. And if we go back to our preview, you can see that, oops, I must have turned, oh, I already turned scrolling on. Ignore that, pretend. So that won't happen on yours. Okay, so now if I go back, you'll see that, you know, I know that the rectangle extends outside of my frame, but I can't actually scroll to access it. And so this requires what you call scrolling. And there are multiple different ways to do this. So let's just say, so first of all, you go into your frame and you turn on, in this case, vertical scrolling. And this will allow it to scroll, you know, as you might expect. So now you can reach the bottom of the rectangle. But there are issues with this also. And, you know, most noticeably, let's say like I draw another shape outside of the frame. Because my frame doesn't extend downwards, the rectangle is actually going to show up not as part of the frame, but outside, which you can see here because it's not nested underneath homepage. And I could, you know, continue drawing elements down and then, you know, drag them underneath homepage so that now it is in fact part of the homepage. But that honestly would just be so difficult, and you wouldn't be able to tell the size of the frame that you're drawing in. So then you have two alternatives to solve this. So I'm going to option click and drag to make a copy of this. And so your first option is actually to literally just extend this frame. So you extend it, you know, as long as you want it to scroll for, and then this will actually allow it to scroll, and you'll be able to see the whole thing. This is kind of an issue when you're prototyping though, or sorry, when you're previewing it, because you'll see that if you're in, scale down to fit, which is like probably the easiest one to use. It'll actually show you your entire frame because it's scaling your entire frame down to fit your screen. So it won't actually show you like what the scrolling behavior looks like unless you're at like one of these other options. And so that can become a little bit of an issue. And so your other alternative is actually to draw a frame within a frame. And so if you actually click on, you know, this frame and you draw a frame for as long as you want it to be, now you can actually scroll without losing the size of your original frame or like your largest frame. And so I need to explain this a little bit more in detail, but essentially when you draw a frame within a frame, your elements, which are like the things that you've actually created that aren't frames, will always be nested under like the lowest level frame that encompasses them in some way. So you can see that as I was drawing this, I didn't even have to move anything into it. Like the elements automatically went into frame one. And then frame one, you'll see right now, you still can't really see the rest of it. And that's because on my largest frame, which is like the big paper that I'm drawing on, I've actually, oh, and I didn't clip the content, but you probably will see something like this because the content is generally clipped. So if you unclip the content, then you'll be able to see everything else that's within homepage, like in full size. And then you'll see frame one right now. When you draw a frame within a frame, it'll automatically give you a fill of nothing because it'll assume that you don't want to like see these other, you know, like a background to it. But in this case, we actually want to fill. So if you click plus, it'll automatically give you a white fill. And so now you have this frame that encompasses everything that you want within it, within this container, which is like a home page. And you can basically scroll through frame one or scroll through frame one within your container. And hopefully that sort of makes sense. You guys will get it a little bit more when I explain the next step. But now you can see it just works, you know, as normal. And so I think everyone right now should just quickly try to make a frame within their frame that extends outside of the home page. And remember to unclip your content in home page and allow for vertical scrolling.
We have a question from David,
Yes.
who's wondering how you unclip the content.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So if you're clicked on your highest level frame, so that would be homepage in this case, you'll see that in your inspector, in this area right here, there's a clip content thing, and normally it'll say clipped. And so you just uncheck the clip content box. All right, is everyone good with that? I'm not hearing any no's, so I'm just gonna move forward. Okay, so now once you've allowed for scrolling, you sort of run into these other issues. And that's the idea that, you know, sometimes you don't want everything to scroll on your page. And probably the easiest example is, you know, when you have, for example, like a nav bar or like a header at the top of your page, you often want it to stick as the user is scrolling. And so let's just say that, and you can make a frame or just a rectangle for the header. I'm just going to make a frame because it'll encompass my home icon in it. And so let's give this frame a fill again. And let's fill it this same red that I had before. Awesome. Okay, so now I have this red header bar, but I haven't told it to stick yet. And so you'll see that if I go into my preview, it'll just go up like the rest of, you know, all my other elements. And so what you can actually do with something that you want to be fixed is that if you, sorry, this should be actually outside. If you have something that's within a scrolling container, so in this case homepage is a scrolling container, you can actually fix the position when scrolling. So you'll see constraints right here, and I just want to click fix position when scrolling. And now you can see that when I scroll, the header stays fixed and everything else goes underneath it and moves. And again, when you first make it, this is going to be a frame within frame 1, but you actually want it to be a frame outside of frame 1. So really quickly, I'm just going to do that again. So you can see it's frame 2 within frame 1. But the problem is frame 1 actually is not a scrolling container. So I have to drag it out so that it's like a top level element within a scrolling container, and in this case, homepage. And then I fix position. And then you can see that it'll actually divide up my homepage into fixed and scrolls for elements. So everyone can just really quickly try and make a fixed header. All right, okay. Hopefully we're all good on that. I'm gonna move forward just because we only have like 10 minutes left, less than. So now I'm actually, you guys can just like try typing some text. Let's just say this is my homepage, way too small, so I'm gonna make it 150. And then in properties is where you modify things. So let's center it. Okay, perfect. So now this is my homepage. And we're just gonna, this for create a web page, we're actually gonna sort of leave it at this. And I do wanna just show you guys really quickly that, you have these different elements and you can actually hide them. So you click the I button to hide them and lock them. So now I can no longer move it around or modify it. And this is useful if you just like have a ton of stuff and you want to make sure that you don't accidentally modify something. So those are just 2 quick functions. I'm actually gonna really quickly go on to components because we don't have that much time and that's a pretty important thing. So you'll see in your left-hand column that you have layers and assets. And so if you go into assets, you'll actually see that you have components and libraries. And we're just going to focus on components now because that's honestly what you'll need for the most part. And a component is essentially something that you're going to be using over and over again throughout your web page that you don't want to, have to create again and again. And so you make a bunch of components that are like very similar. So like, for example, maybe you want all your buttons on the homepage to look very similar. And so you make a button component and then you can drag and drop that all around and just like modify the text slightly so that they're different buttons, but like same style. And so often what you'll want to do is you'll actually want to create a new page for components. So let's just make a new page for components. So now you can see I have a blank canvas. And let's say I want to make a button component. So a button might be, somewhat rectangular. Let's just say about that big. And let's just give it a radius of 25. Okay, this should be smaller then. Cool. Let's make it look something like that. And we can color this button. And let's just say we can call it button. So your button will of course have some text like a call to action. And in this case, we'll name it button, give it a fill of white so it's a little bit more readable. Okay, awesome. So let's just say that I want all my buttons to look like this on my page. So now I have a group of things, and this isn't on a frame. You can make it in a frame. You don't necessarily need to for components, but I'm gonna wanna group this so that it's all one thing. So you can actually, if you click everything in Command G, it'll group it. And we'll just call it button. And now I want to create or turn this into a component. So if I right click, you can see it brings up a whole nother menu, and there's one that says create component. And so now I create component, and you can see that it actually turns into this purple thing. And so now you know that you have a button component. So everyone just make a button component really quickly. So try making a new page and then create any sort of button that you want in there. All right, has everyone made their button? If so, go back to page 1. And now I'm just going to show you guys really quickly how you can actually apply this. So we now have a button component, and let's say we actually want to use this in our home page. So what you can do is you can go to assets, and then you'll see that now you have a button as your local component. And so you can literally just drag and drop this into wherever you want this. So let's say, I want it right here. Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so now my homepage has a button, but I obviously don't want it to be called button. And so you can actually go in and modify. So for components, you can modify them slightly, but not a lot stylistically, because they are supposed to be repeated elements that are very similar. But things like changing the text is something you can do. So let's just say sign up, because oftentimes, you'll want to, use a button for users to sign up. And I'm not going to modify it any further just because of time, but everyone can now just try dragging their button into their homepage and changing the text. And you can see how this would be really useful, because now throughout your entire page, you don't have to make a new button every time or like copy and paste. You literally just go to your assets library and just like drag this in and change the text. All right, and that covers assets. And I'm just going to hit 6 and 7 really quickly. So the other really important part about Figma is prototyping, obviously. So you'll want, developers and whomever else you're presenting the Figma file to like understand how everything fits together. And instead of just like showing them screen after screen like a slideshow, what you can do is you can actually prototype screens together. And so I'll show you really quickly. So let's just make another frame, and let's pretend that this is a sign up page. So I'm going to call it sign up. Sorry. And you might imagine that after the user clicks sign up, it'll actually navigate to this page. And so if you go into prototype, you can see that you can make interactions now, and you can make interactions between anything on a frame to anything on another frame. So if I had like, a page, like a rectangle that wasn't on a frame outside that I want to navigate to, it wouldn't actually let me because it's not contained within a frame. But sign up is its own frame. So now I can actually click on the button, and I can say that when the user clicks on this, I want to have it navigate to the sign up page. And so you can see that there's a little plus button for interactions. You click on it, drag it to wherever you want it to go. And then you actually see this little modal pop up. And this will give you like an array of options to basically modify your interaction to have it go exactly how you want to. So most generally you'll use on click, and then maybe also while hovering, but especially on apps, for example, you might also want like on drag, or like on key gamepad, which is like you might say on space, I want it to do this. Navigate to, open overlay. Right now we just want to navigate to, sign up, so that's correct. And then you can have your animation be instant, which in this case is perfectly fine, but sometimes you do want, for example, if you drag, you want it to slide in, like the next screen to slide in, or maybe you want to delay, or you want it to smart animate. Smart animate is really powerful now. You can't really use it for this, but this is, for example, if you have two screens that are relatively similar, but like maybe one or two things changes, and you don't want it to go entirely from one screen to the next screen. Like you want it to look like just those two elements are changing, you use Smart Animate, and Figma will actually guess for you how you want the interaction to look. So this is a good one for like smaller animations like that. But we'll just do instant for now. And if you go to your preview, you can actually see you have this button, you click sign up, and it actually goes to the next page. Awesome. Okay, cool. So everyone can now just try making another frame and then creating their first prototyped interaction from the sign up button to the sign up screen. Okay, and we're basically out of time, and I want to respect everyone's time, so I'm going to wrap this up in like the next 5 minutes or so. One thing that I didn't get to go over that if you guys look on the docs, you'll see is actually hover types. And so one thing that is really useful, like I said over here, you can have open overlay. And so you guys don't have to test this out, but I just want to show you guys this really quickly. A lot of times you want an element like a button to have a hover type. So when you hover over it, a button, for example, you want it to change color because you want the users to know that this is in fact clickable. Oops, that's not what I wanted. And so what you can do is you can actually make a copy of your element, and it has to be within a frame outside, and then you might like modify some property of it just really, really quickly. So let's just make it like a lighter color, or actually a darker color instead. And then I'll just get rid of the frame color. Awesome. And then one really cool interaction that you can do that I think is just really useful to know is you can actually have this navigate to your overlay. And you want this to be open overlay, and you want it to go on while hovering, open overlay. And it'll center it automatically, but if you click manual, you'll see it pop up and it'll guess where you want it to go. So you'll just want to place it right on top. And then when you actually preview it, you'll see that when you hover over it, it'll look like it's changing. And this is actually really good for developers to know. So they understand that they have to like code in this interaction. So that's just really quickly something for you guys to know. But moving on, best practices. So there are a few best practices that I just want to mention really quickly. I also listed them in the document. First of all, when you design things, they should often be like in multiples of 4 or 8 or 6. You can just choose a number. 4 or 8 are both pretty common. And this basically just helps you kind of determine the sizes of things, like without otherwise you're just like there like dragging rectangles and being like, oh, like that, yeah, that kind of looks correct. But it's much easier if you can say like, oh, I want this to be like a multiple of 8. So this will kind of pinpoint you to an exact number or like size for your rectangle or your button, etc. And then font sizes, if you go online, you'll find like a whole host of resources that are related to like font size best practices. Generally for web pages though, you don't really want them to dip below 16. So just letting you guys know. And that's like for the small paragraph text. Helper text can be a little bit smaller. Finally, for your developers, just so they don't get really annoyed, you do want documentation for your developers to just like guide them through certain components and like explain how screens work. And then you'll probably also want to make a page that's a style guide. And this will, for example, like have all your colors and your fonts and be like, H1 should look like this font in this font weight in this size, and just list these out. This is really useful for the other designers on your team as well as for the developers. And finally, like I mentioned, the chat function. So Figma is really powerful, and the reason people like it is primarily because it's better for collaboration than Adobe XD and Sketch. And so you really want to make full use of this. This is really awesome if you're working in a team in Figma. You can just drop the pin wherever and be like, hey, what do you think of this font? And then you can, at other people. And people can reply. And so, you should always be collaborating in Figma because that's one of like, honestly, the greatest things about Figma. And yeah, that basically wraps it up. I've listed also a bunch of useful commands in my document, so you guys are free to go check that out. Sorry this was so quick, but hopefully I went over all the basics that you guys now need, or that you guys need to create your own apps and web pages. And let me know if you have any questions.
I will stop the recording now, but thank you everyone for coming.